Hello and good morning to Saturday at Portland Retro Gaming Expo. How's everybody doing? Yeah! So we are not, in fact, missing 3 or 4 panelists. There's another panel after this one that has more people than us. But the Apple II, we're a small but mighty crowd. So I'm very excited to be here talking with you today. We're going to do some quick introductions. My name is Ken Gagne, and I am the editor of Juiced GS, which is an Apple II magazine. It's been in print for the last 29 years, coming out every quarter. I know, right? Yeah. And we actually have twice as many subscribers as we had in the 90s. So the Apple II is more popular now than when it was actually being made, which is pretty awesome. And we have 2 great guests with us as well. Ian.
Hi. Hi, I'm Ian Baronofsky, and I'm an Apple II fan and user and archivist.
Oh, we're just doing introductions right now.
Yeah. Oh, great. Okay.
Oh, where'd our slides go? Oh, did this go loose?
And collector of games, computers, and Apple II, but lots and lots of different stuff too. So, and this is.
And you have a vendor booth, right?
I have a vendor booth I share with Billy Galaxy, kind of a local toy dealer, famous guy.
Awesome. Thank you. And finally, but last but not least.
Hi, I'm Kay Savetz. I'm an Atari 8-bit guy. I don't know what I'm doing up here. I have a couple of podcasts, and I work for Internet Archive, and I do archivist stuff with amateur radio and old computers.
Which podcasts are those that you have, Kay?
There is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast at ataripodcast.com, where I've interviewed well over 400 people who did interesting things with Atari and other computers back in the day. And there is Eaten by a Gru, where me and my buddy Carrington Vanson have played every Infocom game and talked about them. And now that we finished those, we're on to other games. I've currently been stuck on Scott Adams' Adventureland for more than a year.
You know, there's somebody here at this convention I think you could talk to about that.
I'm just gonna I'd have to just push him. I'd be like, I don't like you and your game. You made, so yeah, I don't want to, probably shouldn't talk to Scott.
I don't think that's how you get past the part in the game where you're stuck. That's not.
I know, but I built up anger at this game, so it's not going to help me get unstuck, but it's going to help me relieve my the pent-up feelings I have at Scott's game.
But that's your secret. You're always angry.
Yeah.
So, all right. So
After all those Infocom puzzles that make so much sense.
Right. Oh. Awesome. So we're here today to talk about all the modern games that we wouldn't have if not for the impact and influence of the Apple II. How many of you grew up or are familiar with the Apple II? Awesome. Almost all of you. Fantastic. So you're going to see a lot of familiar names up here. Some connections, tie-ins you may be familiar with. Some might be brand new to you, which is going to be surprising and awesome. But we're going to start with Ian talking about why the Apple II. What made the Apple II such a great games machine?
So why the Apple II? Well, there was a lot of great stuff that came out of the Apple II. It came out of all the computers at the time, but the Apple II especially. Well, there's one reason, and that is Steve Wozniak. Wozniak was the reason why so many games originated on the Apple II. He's an avid gamer, and he's famous for using the arcade game Breakout as one of his use cases for designing the system. He said it had to play Breakout. And he was able to cost reduce a lot of forward-thinking features from 1977 that allowed the Apple II to live on for a really long time, more so than the competitors of the time. So there's a few reasons specifically, other than Steve Wozniak. It was early to market and it was expandable at the time. He was interested in catering to his homebrew computing club friends, and they all wanted to add and change computers as they went. It had excuse me, it had advanced graphics capabilities because he wanted to play games, and he really was the first to implement in a home computer bitmapped graphics. It was early to market, and it had the Disk 2 system, which was an affordable disk drive in 1978. Other computers had disk drives, but this was much cheaper. I'll talk more about all these things. It had a lot of developer support, and that's from Apple themselves. They weren't trying to take a cut from every software every software purchase, every software sale. Apple was aggressive in pursuing the educational market, and so a lot of people just know the Apple II from their school experiences. And then they upgraded the computer a little bit in 1982 with the introduction of the IIe to 128K and double high-res graphics. I'll talk about all these things. So in the beginning, when it came to consumer computers, there was the holy trinity of home computing that started in 1977. The Apple II, the TRS-80 Model 1, and the Commodore PET were all released in 1977, although it wasn't like you could just run to the store and buy one. You had to order it, and they were quite delayed. And really, it was not until 1978 that people started receiving these computers in earnest. The Apple II was easily expandable. It had RAM sockets on the board that were just empty. So you could just go buy your RAM and slot it in there. It came with 4K, or the high-end Apple II was 16K of RAM. Not a lot. And it had expansion slots you could get to easily. You could just pop them open, and still a fun part of having an Apple II today. RAM was expensive, so it was one of the most expensive components in these computers, and it was about $125 for 4K in 1977. So you wanted that 16K fully loaded computer. It added another, $375 to the cost. And $375 in 1977 is a lot of money. So even by 1980, it was still about $100 for 16K, but prices went down dramatically, and the expandability of the computer made it so you could just go buy more RAM as RAM got cheaper and your needs increased. The TRS-80 and the PET outsold the computer early on, but the Apple II, that is. But since it was expandable, it survived past these other systems, and there were the Apple II Plus release, the Apple IIe release, and the IIc, which was very similar to a IIe but cuter. So the computer could outlive these other two platforms that, although Tandy and Commodore both released new and awesome computers, the Apple II just kept on going. So the Apple II had high-res graphics, which the TRS-80 and the PET didn't. They had text-based graphics. It has multiple graphics modes from the start, including 16-color low-res graphics, which were 40 by 48 pixels, pretty juicy pixels there, and 8-color 280.
Boys.
What's that?
Chunky boys.
Chunky. It's really fun to see low-res games from the day. And 8-color 280 by 192 bitmapped graphics, which were ingeniously implemented. Wozniak used chip and cost-saving techniques to fit all those pixels into 8K of memory. I think if you mapped a byte per pixel, it's something like 64K, and nobody could afford that. The computer didn't even offer that much. So if you bought that 4K Apple II, you couldn't even do high-res graphics because there wasn't enough memory to fit, but it was still incredibly compact. Wozniak designed it to have two high-res screens, so the computer could switch between them for animation. There was no sprites, there was no chip-assisted animation, but having two screens made it last even longer. So here's a few early wonderful regular high-res games. We have Wizardry on the left. We have the famous Mystery House in the middle, and Ultima Exodus 3, which came out quite a bit later, showing how far they came over the course of 4 years of programming this thing. So the Apple II disk drive really made a huge difference, because before the disk drive, these three Holy Trinity home computers used cassette tapes for program storage. I mean, only a year or two before, with Altair and these other more homebrew hobbyist computers, they were frequently using paper tape or other no memory methods for program storage. So cassette tapes were slow and made it harder to save data frequently. And the disk tube and the controller card were these cost-reduced designs by Steve Wozniak that allowed it to be first to market with affordable mass storage. So the story was that Steve Jobs convinced Shugart, which is a major disk drive manufacturer, to sell Apple the disk drive for $100, just a bare disk drive with no controller boards. The board that's attached to these disk drives is called the analog board. And he said, no, we don't need that. And it saved an enormous amount of money because chips at the time were so expensive. So Wozniak designed an analog card and a controller card that went in the computer with 10 times fewer chips. He also designed the disk system with a higher capacity and more flexibility. And the disk drives allowed for developers to create more complex programs like VisiCalc and to make even deeper games. So the Apple II originated in homebrew computing, and developer support was encouraged by Apple. For the Tandy TRS-80, Radio Shack wanted to sell all of the software and take a cut on it, and it made it harder for developers, or slightly less common for developers, to do their own thing and create their own programs and games. Apple charged no licensing fees. Everybody used DOS 3.3, the final standard for early disk operating system, for free. And it was basically a type of app store, although now Apple takes quite a cut. But it was the Wild West of software and game development. People just did whatever they wanted. And they'd have to sell it through whatever channels they could find, which was sometimes just the back of a magazine.
We might need to skip a few slides for time.
Okay, no problem. So Apple upgraded in 1982 to double high res, making it even more tempting of a platform for games. When the Apple IIe came out, it offered an 80-column card for 80 columns of text, wow. And it added 64K of memory and double high-res graphics. Double high-res graphics had a complex memory scheme that was really pretty difficult to program, but it really made the games look prettier. And although the double high-res graphics gave the platform, the Apple II, some legs through the 80s, only about 100 games were released that required it, because everybody was kind of sticking to 64K, which at that point, by 1982, was the standard for an Apple II. So here's an example of double high-res King's Quest on your left, and compared to the IBM PC EGA version of King's Quest, which is actually where the game was originally released. And just a quick example of what double high-res looked like at its best. This game, Earhart, it's a pretty obscure title from Broderbund, but you can see the programmer did some gorgeous graphics, really probably one of the best implementations of it. And it was like a fully animated kind of bizarre arcade game that honestly, if I sat down, I wouldn't even remember how to play. It's so weird. But it's definitely something to check out. Broderbund did so much great stuff. So in the end, some comments. By the time the Commodore 64 was released in 1982, that had a lot of custom chips, just like the Atari did, really. Apple II developers had so much experience they could really push the computer to do incredible things in games. And they continued to squeeze a lot of stuff out into the 80s that was just amazing, that no one would have imagined was even possible when the system came out, even though it was hardly modified. I mean, adding a little memory, and it was just incredible. I used the IIe from 83 to 88, and it was my second computer. I had a Commodore PET. My mom got me like a used Commodore PET. I had that for a while, and when I finally sold the thing to buy an NES, I sold it like on a classified ad, and I moved up to a 286 PC, which was a piece of junk. Only by that time did I really feel like there was a need to move on. The computer lasted a long time, and it had a lot of legs. And Apple continued to sell the computer through 1992, mainly to schools, but that's how a lot of people saw this computer and experienced it through educational software and like Oregon Trail. But thank you very much.
Yeah, cool. So now let's take a look at, thank you, Ian. So now we're going to take a look at some games from the Apple II era and what we may see in them today. So let's start with a developer from the 80s who was a teenager. Let me describe him to you from Wikipedia. When he was 14, he broke into a school with other children to steal Apple II computers. To gain entry to the building, he concocted a sticky substance of thermite mixed with Vaseline that melted through the windows. However, an overweight accomplice struggled to get through the hole and instead opened the window, setting off a silent alarm and alerting police. He was arrested and sent for psychiatric evaluation. He was sentenced to a year in a juvenile home. Well, not a very auspicious start to the career of the person we now know as John Carmack, co-creator of Doom, co-founder of id Software. He eventually landed on his feet, found himself in Shreveport, Louisiana, working for a little company called SoftDisk. They made some Apple II software like this game called Dangerous Dave. It played a little bit like this. You're just going around through these treasure caves trying to collect everything. And that game was made by another SoftDisk employee down in Shreveport, whom we may know as John Romero, also co-creator of Doom and co-founder of id. So that's how the two Johns met. This is John with his original Apple II, now on display at the Strong Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. So the two Johns got together and they said, let's make like a 3D shooting game. Let's go around, like we'll be shooting Nazis. It'll be really awesome. What should we call this game? And John Romero was like, well, you know, there's this Apple II game I used to love playing. Let's see if we can get the rights to the name of it. And that Apple II game was Castle Wolfenstein. So they made Wolfenstein 3D for DOS based on this Apple II game. This is actually a screenshot from the Apple II GS version of Wolf, which came out many years later. But this is what the original Castle Wolfenstein actually looked like. Like, this is not a 3D shooting game. This is you in a Nazi castle trying to avoid detection by these Nazi soldiers. You have limited bullets. There are more of them than you. So the goal is not to kill, well, you can kill, but the goal is not to kill every Nazi you see. The goal is really to be stealthy. Like, you can actually get a Nazi uniform and go in disguise and they won't bother you. So this sort of like tactical espionage action is what we see nowadays in Metal Gear. So Castle Wolfenstein, the name inspired Wolfenstein 3D, but the gameplay inspired games like Metal Gear, which originally came out for the MSX computer and then the NES. Whoops. And like, it's a little dark, but you can see like this guy, he's trying to avoid this soldier right here. So he waits until the soldier falls asleep, and then he sneaks around him and gets the item he needs. He goes back out, and again, he's waiting until the guards have their backs turned, just like in Wolfenstein for the Apple II. And it's kind of the same thing nowadays in Metal Gear Solid, which is 3D. You're not going in guns blazing. You're trying to avoid detection by the enemies, just like in the original stealth game, Castle Wolfenstein. Yeah, right in the head. Boom. Another classic Apple II game, Prince of Persia by Jordan Mechner. This was a game that came out in 1989, and you are the prince. You have like an hour to get through this dungeon to which you've been exiled and escape and rescue the princess and defeat the evil Jafar, just like in Aladdin. One of the very first games to use rotoscoping for the animation. And about a decade or so after this game came out, Ubisoft rebooted it. They did a whole trilogy called The Sands of Time, Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time. And there's all this parkour action in it where like you can be running along walls and you're jumping and hanging off stuff. And very successful trilogy, Prince of Persia. And when that was done, Ubisoft said, you know, we really love this idea of like doing parkour in the Middle East, but what if you weren't the prince? Like, what if you were doing parkour in the Middle East, but instead of being the prince, you were the prince's bodyguard, or maybe you were the prince's assassin. And so they made Assassin's Creed. Like, the entire Assassin's Creed franchise is basically a spin-off of Prince of Persia for the Apple II, which I just realized myself recently. I was reading an interview with Jordan Mechner, and I had no idea that Assassin's Creed was originally like going to be a Prince of Persia game, which is amazing to me. Jordan Mechner, of course, before he made Prince of Persia, he made Karateka, and this game, you are again trying to save the princess, and so you're defeating these enemies, and it's just a 2D side-scroller, not really jumping around like in Prince of Persia. But as you progress through this game, as you make your way left to right, and you're defeating the enemies, Wow, those games were slow back then.
Stand up and run.
You could, but yes. So as you exit the screen, suddenly the game switches, and you're not the main character in this scene. You're seeing the evil villain, the warlord, telling his bad guys what to do. So it's cutting away from the action to show you something that's happening somewhere else. And that's an early cutscene, a form of narrative storytelling in video games. Maniac Mansion, which came out in 1987, a few years later, also did this. So in this scene right here, it's a point-and-click adventure, and you're opening the refrigerator, and you're examining the items that are in the fridge. And this game is also very slow. And suddenly, as you're examining like the bottles of ketchup and the juice, etc., suddenly the game cuts away. And again, it shows you what the villain is doing. In Maniac Mansion, it wasn't action triggered like in Karateka. Karateka, you get to the end of the level, it shows you a cutscene. In this game, it was time-based. Like every 10 minutes, no matter what you were doing, it would cut away to a cutscene. So it wasn't triggered by you opening the fridge. That's just what you happened to be doing in that moment. And nowadays, these non-interactive cutscenes, especially in games like Metal Gear Solid, are prolific. It's a way of telling you what's happening, even when you're not right there. So in one of your slides, you had Zork, and I think Zork was originally for the PDP. Like it came out for the Apple II, right? But was it originally for the PDP?
Well, Colossal Cave was a PDP
Okay.
program game. And Zork was actually a slice, just a third or less of Colossal Cave.
Okay, cool. So, but that was certainly like the origin of text adventures,
Yes.
was Colossal Cave and Adventure. A series of adventure games that was unique to the Apple II was Eamon Adventures, E-A-M-O-N. And it was sort of a modular system where you could create a character and then send him on all these quests. And it was the same character. And anybody in the world could make these quests and just plug them in. I made one in 6th grade as a school project based on the book Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim. And the teacher was like, I have no idea what this is. A+. Okay, whatever. I'm still trying to find that floppy disk. But again, text-based adventure, very often a parser interface, verb and noun like get torch, go north, etc. 40 columns of text, very exciting. Eventually, this sort of adventure evolved to include graphics like King's Quest. So here, I love the way those old games just draw the world as you see it, like it's coming to life. It's not already there. I love that. And here, Prince Graham, you can point and click and use the mouse and arrow keys to direct him, but then eventually you're typing with that text parser, push rock, get dagger, etc. So it's sort of the best of both worlds. You're using the text-based parser, but you're actually getting to visualize and see the world that Graham lives in. Maniac Mansion took it yet a step further. By the way, this was the first game ever by LucasArts, the company that makes Star Wars, decided, let's make our debut with Maniac Mansion. So here you have this controlled taxonomy at the bottom, push, pull, get, give, etc. And you click on the command you want, and then you click on the item above. So very similar to a text parser, except you're not typing anymore. So the game doesn't have to account for every single possibility, every single word that you could type. It's just click on the word, and then click on the picture. And we see that nowadays. Here's a game where you can very literally get axe. This is The Walking Dead by Telltale. So in this game, it shows you the world, and you can walk around, and it shows you what you can interact with. And again, you go up to it, and it says like push Y, and it's open drawer. Push Y, get axe. And all these Telltale games and other games like Life is Strange, for example, these are all basically like text adventures. These are point-and-click adventures. Some people talk about how, point and click is dead. They're like, no, it's not dead, it just evolved. We may not be playing King's Quest anymore, but we're playing Telltale games, we're playing Life is Strange, even walking simulators like, somebody scoffs at walking simulator. I don't use the word derogatorily. Firewatch is one of the best games of all time. And Panic is down at the show floor with their play date. Go talk to them. Do any of you play like Telltale games or anything like that? No?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I played through Firewatch. I loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that game was made by Campo Santo, which unfortunately is not, they got absorbed into Valve and now they make Half-Life. But yeah, I love the games that we're seeing now because of these old games.
And I own a Playdate. Thank
Yeah.
you. Yes.
Awesome. Cute little, it's got a crank. It's so cute. I love it. So, Ultima by Richard Garriott. I see an Ultima shirt in the audience right there. That's Quest of the Avatar, right? Ultima 4. Yeah. Excellent game. Also known as Ultima 2 for the 8-bit Nintendo, which is, I don't know, it's not even Japanese, like Final Fantasy, whatever. So Ultima, one of the very first role-playing games, it came out around the same time like Dungeons & Dragons and Lord of the Rings were becoming popular. This confluence of computers, RPGs, and Lord of the Rings was just unprecedented. And so you explore this overworld, you go down into the dungeon, and it's this like 3D wireframe, very basic graphics. There are enemies that you can fight, and you're just like throwing daggers at them, whatever. A modern game that's very similar to this, doesn't look modern, it's Nox Archaeist. This came out in 2020, and this is actually a brand new RPG for the 8-bit Apple II, and it came in a box set with a cloth map and feelies, and you can also buy this exact same game on Steam and play it on Mac and Windows. But it's the same game that comes on 5.25-inch floppy disks for the Apple II. So this game was kickstarted. I backed the Kickstarter. Probably some of us did as well. And they're working on the sequel. There's a new game coming out right now. I'm backing the Patreon for that. But Nox Archaeist is actually the most recent appearance in a game by Lord British. Richard Garriott gave his permission to appear in this game as an NPC. And no, you cannot kill him. People have tried. There was a bug, I think, in an earlier version where you could turn him into a cow and then kill him. They fixed that. So you should never be able to kill Lord British.
Yeah, I played through Nox Archaeist. It took me about 80 hours. I wrote a review for Juice.gs about it. It was actually pretty awesome. Definitely worth checking out.
And I believe I've tapped you to, and you also reviewed the expansion pack, because they did DLC for that game.
Yeah.
DLC for an Apple II game. Just wrap your head around that. That's awesome. I hope they don't go to microtransactions next. Later in the series, Ultima 4, Quest of the Avatar, came out in 1985. And the gimmick for this game was, although Britannia now prospers under Lord British's rule, he fears for his subjects' spiritual well-being and summons the stranger again to become a spiritual leader of Britannia, the people by example. So this was a really interesting starting to the game where they put you in a situation, like you see an old lady stealing apples, what are you going to do? And like your choices are valor or compassion, honesty or this or that. And it keeps asking you these binary questions until it narrows it down to just one of 8 virtues. And that determines the character class you're going to play. Are you going to be a paladin, a tinker, a shepherd, whatever? And what's really interesting about this is that the game is no longer about just hacking and slashing your way through dungeons. There's actually a morality system now where you need to choose in every situation how this reflects on your character and what kind of person you want to be and who you want to attract to your party. Like if you're a dishonest person, you can't attract the party member who embodies honesty. And so there are all these choices you need to make beyond just surviving the next combat. And so many games nowadays have these morality systems. Sometimes it's very binary, like Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, which came out in 2003, where you're just choosing between the light side and the dark side. Like the dark side, you get to use force lightning, which is really powerful, but it makes you a bad person. So do you want to be a good person or a bad person? What kind of ending in the game do you want to get? Do you want to redeem yourself, or do you just want to give into the corruption and rule the world because somebody has to make them agree? So, but even back in the Apple II, we were thinking about how do we move beyond just shooting at things. Let's see, what game is that? Oh, this is a fun part. I like this one. So Firebird for the Apple II. This says Gabelli Software, and it came out in 1981. And it's this cute little game where there's a phoenix doing what phoenixes do, which is apparently burn down buildings. And as people fall out of the building, you have to rescue them, put them on top of the building so the helicopter can take them away. And for every person you save, the helicopter brings back a unit of the building. The person playing this game is not particularly adept. A lot of people fall to their death. But that is the idea of the game. This same person, Nasser Gabelli, made Space Eggs. It says by Nasser. And this game, like so many games back in the early 80s, this came out in 81. It's a clone of games like Space Invaders and Galaga. It was not original. These game concepts were not groundbreaking on the Apple II. This did not necessarily inspire new games. But what's really interesting is, these two games have the developer's name at the beginning. It says by Nasser, Space Eggs by Nasser. Where else have we seen that before? Oh yeah, Final Fantasy. He wrote Final Fantasy. Like, this is the entire programming credits. The original 8-bit Final Fantasy game from Square, before they were known, Square. Before, they weren't merged with Enix yet. This Iranian developer who emigrated eventually to Japan, got hooked up with Square, and he didn't conceive of Final Fantasy. He's not the creator of Final Fantasy, but he is the programmer. And there are some fascinating talks about some of the techniques he used. Like, random numbers are actually really hard to generate. Like, there are some companies out there today I've heard where they have cameras pointed at a bank of lava lamps, and they use that as the random input to generate their numbers. We didn't have that back then. So Nasser Gabelli, he hard-coded 256 values into a table, and it basically just goes through them. So the numbers seem random, but if you play the game the same way, the same time, you'll get the same results every time. So not entirely random. Final Fantasy, the developers have said that they were inspired by other games like Wizardry, which is the shirt I'm wearing, and which is the cover of this magazine. Wizardry came out in 1981, and similar to Ultima, except without the overworld map, it's just a 3D wireframe that takes up maybe like an eighth of the screen. The dungeon is a very small part of the screen. Everything else is statistics about your characters, your hit points, your inventory, your commands, etc. But as you encounter monsters, they get these little visual representations. So this is a slime. Be very aware of the slimes. This is a bubbly slime, which I guess means he's very, a lot of fun at parties. Yeah. So here's a slime. Here's a bubbly slime. This Japanese software creator named Yuji Horii said, I want a character like that in my game. So he hand-sketched a little slime, and he handed it to his game's illustrator, who came back with this. Akira Toriyama, the recently late Akira Toriyama, created this slime for Dragon Quest. And this was inspired by Wizardry. We went from these three slimes to this guy, who's just iconic. I saw carpets and rugs and doormats down the show floor inspired by this character. You'll see slimes everywhere. Digital Eclipse, which was recently purchased by Atari last year, released in early access, and May of this year officially released a new version of Wizardry. So this is the Apple II version, and now this is their new version, as you've never seen it before. So modern graphics, modern sound, quality of life improvements to the interface, but due to the Eclipse engine that they use, it's still the Apple II source code running underneath it all. So they layered on new graphics and sound on top of it, but it's all the same dungeons, it's all the same code. They did add some things, as I mentioned, like an auto map. They may have fixed some bugs, but there's actually a gentleman named Eric LaBelle who last year came out with Wizardry 3.0. The last official version of Wizardry came out in 1983, and it still had some bugs and stuff. So Eric went through it and created the version of Wizardry that we should have had 30 years ago. And he released a new version of Wizardry for the Apple II that fixes all these bugs. And then he reviewed Digital Eclipse's new version for the magazine that I published. This is the cover story. And he was like, yeah, they fixed these same bugs too, blah, blah, blah. Or oh, this bug is still in, and that's really authentic, etc. And so it was really interesting to get that comparison of like, from a purist enthusiast perspective, like, is it still wizardry? Like, if you fix the bugs, is it still wizardry? I don't know. But let's see, we have 10 minutes, and we're gonna get through this. This is gonna be awesome.
We do or we don't.
And feel free to chime in if you love these
stuff. I got nothing to say.
Atari, honestly. No. I love Atari, and I'm a big fan of Kay as well, but we have an ongoing gag where we just say boo Atari. And I hope you know that we say that with the most love.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, no, really.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So 1983, one of the first licensed sports games. Dr. J and Larry Bird go one-on-one. That is not a scream, that is the crowd. Yeah, like, it sounds like a horror movie. So this is Dr. Julius Erving and Larry Bird. I'm from Boston, woohoo, go Celtics. This game was written by a 19-year-old named Eric Hammond, and it was published by an up-and-coming studio, and it went over really well. It was well sold. The athletes who didn't really understand what they were doing when they agreed to it thought it came out pretty well. And this demonstrated that this studio was capable of taking well-known athletes and creating good games based on those licenses. And so based on the reception of this game, they were able to use that credit and go around to another athlete and say, we want to make a game based on you next. And this guy said, well, since you did such a good job with Dr. J and Larry Bird, sure, you can make a game based on me. And that's how we got John Madden Football. If it weren't for 19-year-old Eric Hammond making Dr. J and Larry Bird, we wouldn't have John Madden Football. This is what the first one looked like. And now it comes out every single year from Electronic Arts. Who knows if we would even have Electronic Arts if it were not for Dr. J and Larry Bird. So those early successes paved the way for these huge conglomerates now. Choplifter by Dan Gorlin. And I think you want to talk a little bit about the next game as well.
I get to talk.
I
get to talk.
So Choplifter, classic game. You're trying to rescue hostages. So you land and you blow open their building. You land. You get everybody into your Choplifter or your helicopter, and then you take off. And you hope that you don't get shot down because then everybody on board dies. So that's the risk you take.
Well, now we're getting into the era of like arcade games were successful enough computer games were successful enough that arcade makers were just like, well, let's see if we can put this in the arcade too. And so they did that with Choplifter, which was okay. I mean, as a game, the Apple II version was better. And then also Lode Runner. Now, Lode Runner was a game where you run around and you try to get gold bars and steal them from zombies. There was really no randomness in this game. You could predict how the guards were going to behave, and it was a strategy game more than a run and shoot. And then they decided, okay, well, let's make an arcade game out of this too. And thank you. That's a very nice two-shot. Where you knew what I was going to talk about. And so they did an arcade version of that, and it was kind of a different game because people in arcades expect a little more action, a little more shoot and run, and not like a strategy thinker game. And neither of these were super successful as arcade games, I think, and it didn't. We're not seeing a Choplifter, reboots today, and Lode Runner is. There were many versions of Lode Runner, Lode Runner's Rescue and Championship Lode Runner, and then it sort of petered out, I think.
Yeah, the last Choplifter I know of is for the Xbox 360, and it was very good. There is a Lode Runner game that came out for the Switch. And it has all original 150 levels. Right. But nowadays, they really do emphasize the puzzle aspect of the game, in my opinion. But these are two of the first games that I know of that were ported from the computer to the arcade. There were tons of things going the other way. I mean, that's why we have the Apple II. Steve Wozniak, as Ian said, wanted to play Breakout at home. So he made a machine to do it. But this is going the opposite direction. And it was one of the first cases where the computers were kind of starting to catch up to the arcade. And as we eventually saw, one of the reasons why arcades don't exist in the same capacity or manner that they did before. I want to share this one quick quote about Lode Runner. In the early days, there was Lode Runner, my favorite for many, many years. Every level was a real puzzle with its own mechanics, its own dynamics, its own kind of solution. This combination was done absolutely right. I can't imagine any other game with such inventive and unusual design, which are high words of praise coming from the creator of Tetris. This guy loved Lode Runner. Now, as you said, we don't really see these games on the scale today that we do, like John Madden Football, etc. And the creator of Lode Runner, Douglas E. Smith, yeah, he developed and designed Lode Runner. And you don't really hear that name today like John Romero or John Carmack. So you might think, he's kind of a one-hit wonder. He did Lode Runner. Let's take a look at what else he might have done in his career. Executive producer, Secret of Mana. Oh, okay. Executive producer, Secret of Evermore. Level design, Lemmings 2. Remake staff, Chrono Trigger. Remake as in localization. And computer graphics designer, Final Fantasy VII. So this guy actually went on to do a huge number of things. He didn't get the praise and recognition of some other developers you may have heard of, but he's a big deal. He was a big deal. He did a lot of awesome stuff, starting with Lode Runner. All right, we have 3 minutes. Let's see if we can blaze through these.
I want to talk about Oregon Trail really fast.
Yeah.
We've talked about games that beget more games. John Madden Football. Oh boy, there's more John Madden Football. Lovely. But Oregon Trail escaped the video game, the computer game thing, and got out into the real world. Oregon Trail has made electronic. There's now electronic games of Oregon Trail. There's card games of Oregon Trail. There has been 3 stage plays / musicals, 3 different ones based on Oregon Trail, and it is a game that has super in the zeitgeist more than just even if you don't know anything about computer games, anything about video games, you probably know Oregon Trail. Your mom's probably heard about Oregon Trail, so that kind of really got out of the made it out into the world. It succeeded. It escaped. It won. And I mean, that game was about getting from Independence, Missouri to the Willamette Valley in Oregon, which you have all done. Congratulations. Yeah. You win. You didn't die of dysentery.
Now, I'm from the East Coast. Is it true that out here the game is just called Trail? Okay. And you're a local, and so you might know that there was even a 5K race a few years ago, the Oregon Trail Game 5K. And is Marcus in the audience? No? Okay. He's at the event, and he ran the 5K, and he wrote about it for our magazine.
Yeah, I wanted to go, but I couldn't afford the entry fee.
Boo Atari. Okay, we have 1:15 seconds left.
All right.
Kay, why did these games endure?
We don't have time to talk about this, but I want you, as you're walking around, I want you to think about this on your own. The games that we've talked about, why are they the ones that succeeded? Why are they the ones that have made more games? And why not other games? There are other games that were as equally well known or well loved or back in the 80s that are forgotten about today. Why are we not? Lemonade Stand was on every Apple II. Every kid played Lemonade Stand. Why are we not playing Lemonade Tycoon today? That should be a thing. I would play that.
I would play that. Yeah. Get started on that.
And there were other great games like Spare Change and Wavy Navy and Apple Panic. There were other fine games that could have hit escape velocity and kept going, and they didn't. And so why did the ones that make it out and succeed, why did they continue to succeed? Was it random luck? Was it because the tenacity of the creator? In some cases, absolutely. Was it? Those are the ones that hit the most nostalgic, pangs in the brain. I don't know, but think about that. Discuss among yourselves as you explore PRGE.
Yeah. And that's it. Thank you. Unfortunately, we don't have time for question and answers, but Apple II forever.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and here are a few more videos for you to check out.